Welcome back to another episode, another installment of the long form interviews for Subversives, the history of Lois the Low. My name is Simon Head. I'm the director and creator of the movie Subversives, the history of Lois the Low. This episode's a little different because it actually involves Ron Hawkins and Stephen Stanley in a joint interview talking about Shakespeare My Butt. This ended up becoming the song for song mini doc or mini whatever it was. It was recorded on April 15th, 2023. So it was actually pretty close to when it actually came out. It was Ron's idea originally to put him and Steven together to do an interview about the documentary. This is a perfect opportunity because they got to talk about a classic album, Shakespeare My Butt. That's kind of what makes this episode interesting, is that these guys are in a room talking about something, and then eventually they go to a studio, which was, I think, earlier, 6 months before. To me, is a special thing to be able to talk to Ron and Steve about this great record. If you want to subscribe to this channel, please do that. Tell your friends, hit that notification bell, do all the things that people do. They smash stuff, smash it all. I want to let you know that the episode is still available on Apple TV. You can get it in North America and Canada and America. You can get it in the UK, Australia. You can also get it in Ireland, I believe. The other thing you can do is you can get it on YouTube, which is worldwide. And if you want nothing to do with that stuff, then you can go buy a Blu-ray. But the best way to buy this Blu-ray right now, go to the merch table at a Lois of the Low show. Go find out where they're playing. Go there, buy a Blu-ray. You'll be supporting the band. If you go buy it off the merch table, it's just a much easier way, and it turns out to be a little bit cheaper. But if you're in another country, another town, another city, you can't make it out to wherever they're playing, go to Amazon, pick it up from there. It ships out of Canada. I have said all the things I need to say. This is the episode number 10. So without further ado, here they are. Right here. Right here. There they are. Ron and Steve. Check them out.
Speaking of which, Ruby
I have to look it up.
sort of grudgingly, and I think just to irritate me, kind of likes Billy Joel. So she, I'm like, he's got one song, Only the Good Die Young.
So you don't like Piano Man. See, I would have said that's the one song that I can get myself behind is Piano Man.
But she was talking about we didn't start the fire. I'm like, we didn't start the fire, but we did ignite it, which is the dictionary definition of starting a fire. And at some point in the song, he says, it was always burning since the world. I'm like, so he didn't start the fire, and he didn't ignite it because he wasn't even there.
It was always there.
It doesn't make any sense, dude.
Ready? 4 o'clock stop? Play a little.
So are you asking us a particular question, or?
So I'm just going to say, we'll just listen to a bit and then just sort of make comment to it, and sort of if you have any other old stories that happened during either the writing, the recording, or the performance parts of it.
Oh boy, yeah, that's going back.
Do
you remember anything about recording this record?
Who are you?
Exactly.
Who is this guy?
I'm gonna lock you guys in.
It's not the first time we've heard that.
You're locked in a bar.
Last guy who locked us in a bar went out of business.
You can't kill me. I'm already dead.
Johnny, what would you say is like capacity here for a live music show?
260?
What, like right here?
No, like crowd. Like what can you put in? How many people?
Fuck as many as you want. Do you want to do it during like business hours?
No, I'm just
jam the room. You know what I mean? There's all bets are off.
Well, at some point you got to stop opening the door. Like what's it, like 35, 40, 45?
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay, figured. Okay.
Sweet.
They're just numbers. They're just numbers.
It's just numbers. I agree with that.
That's it. I'm gonna go get something to eat.
Okay.
Anybody need anything?
Fine. Thanks, Johnny.
I'm back in about an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just, we just talk about, I don't know, memories that came from
That's awesome.
It's still
Ron.
been watching Lost a lot lately.
Oh yeah.
And it's like,
I've never watched Lost. I don't really know anything about it.
So yeah, I mean, it was just sort of candid conversation about listening to the song for a second and sort of make anything that comes out of it. It's just because when I was at the studio, there was like lots of great conversation, but it was sort of sparsely put in. You know what I mean? I thought you guys, it was the time of the studio to listen. Now's the time maybe to reflect, even though it happened a year ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But do we have to play the songs? I guess you just know, like.
Yeah. What is this? Is this going to play something?
No.
No. Okay.
It's a prop.
All right.
Are we rolling?
We could probably get it plugged in if you want, like if that's what.
It doesn't make it. Well, you can't see it anyways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can't see where it goes. It's like one of those.
So 4 o'clock stop.
Oh, so that's it. We're just talking about we're just staying name of song. Okay.
And go through the.
4 o'clock stop. So to me, when we went to the studio and heard the remixes, not the remixes, when we heard that from the 24 track tape, I was recently, like very recently, I was very blown away with the precision on that song, because I never thought of us as a precise band, but I think that needs to be rethought, because listening to the bed tracks and listening to the isolated tracks, I realized how, the fact that we were always touring, and when we weren't touring, we were in rehearsal spaces and we were always working on music, that it really did pay off in some very precise playing. And that record, like as we found out, we didn't leave anything off it. Like, there was like one guitar part we found on the whole record that didn't make the record. So everything was very precise and very, very calculated, and I think there's a real good idea of, especially between you and I, and the two guitars, of what's happening and how they work together. Kind of like a band like Midnight Oil, which I always sort of listened to those two guitar players and thought, these guys, like, they just play off each other so well. And I don't think you realize it when you're in it, how well you're doing it, but I think we did it really well.
Yeah. Well, and also, like you said, about not just touring, because I'm not sure how much touring we had done by then, but we had come out of Popular Front, where I remember the Popular Front ethos was like, rehearse all the time, gig once in a while, don't develop an audience whatsoever. So like, we had been hard at it, hammering at it, seriously, for a long time. And that thing, I think, is like, that's how you and I developed that. It's not telekinesis. That would mean I was bending your guitar with my mind, but no, that's a sort of psychic connection of knowing where the other guy is. Didn't you tell me when the rehearsals for the Brown Hawkins Stanley thing recently that two people were in the room watching us rehearse, and one person turned to the other person and said, "Look at them. They know exactly where they are in space at any given time."
They said, just watch how innate it is when it's happening, because it's just like, it's not just two people that sort of just have this sort of poetic movement musically and physically around each other. I mean, at that, that I don't even see that now. Like, we're not playing together as much anymore, but when we do play together, it feels really natural. But I think it just is what it is. But
it's like riding a tandem bike.
Yeah, exactly. Which well, we must have done that at some point.
At least for a photo shoot. 4 o'clock stop too. I remember that was one of the ones that came out of that little window between Popular Front and Lowest to the Low, when everything kind of changed, because I remember that came out of me having almost an illicit affair at the end of my relationship at that point, and it was one of the triggers that sort of broke that relationship up and sent me on that whirlwind of stuff that I wrote for Shakespeare. And I remember, so it's all about that, like the night I met this person, and then
this is not the only song on the record about this woman.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And
Dun, 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 dun.
and then I remember that night going to that party. Had a show, actually. Went to a party at my friend Steve Gelling's house, and then walked this woman home, and and was sort of tortured by this situation I was in, sort of falling for this person, being in a relationship that was already kind of ending, and all of the decisions that came around that. So I remember that being a very intense thing to write, and I think it was one of the first things that were very, very true to me, like very autobiographical, that I felt that sort of prickliness of like, wow, do I go there? Like, do I go that raw? Do I go that close to reality? Because I don't think I'd ever done that in a song before. And then that kind of, once I dipped my toe into that style of writing, and the door opened a little bit, and I was like, oh, there's a whole world in there, And I think that's where we sort of started to bring it close to home. And I remember also ripping that title, 4 O'Clock Stop, off of, I think there's a Bob Marley and the Wailers tune called 3 O'Clock Roadblock.
Oh yeah, right.
So it was kind of like, I'll have some of that.
Yeah.
And it's like that sort of pastiche of where you take little things from here and there and then kind of make them your own. But.
And do you think, did that woman know that those songs were better at some point?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, I think it was, I think after Shakespeare came out and it was very popular, I think a lot of our friends and a lot of acquaintances said to me, maybe next time you don't use proper names.
Yeah. Well, so like, there you go. So maybe we can agree that she was your Sharona. And cut.
Camera bag out of the shot.
Uh-oh.
It's like he doesn't have any cameras going right now.
Start again. No, I'm just.
What's next? What's the next song?
So Long Bernie. Speaking of names.
Oh my God, So Long Bernie. Do you remember where that came from?
Well, yeah, vaguely. You have to tell the story though.
Because we had become friends with Dig Circus.
Yeah.
So we had been
Are we on? Okay.
we had been playing those Free Times Cafes open stages, I remember. And I can't remember if all three, well, obviously all three of us were there because we probably played that night, but you and I definitely were always going to see them. And I remember that another friend of ours used to say, oh yeah, canoe songs. Because it was like, they're like all night long, you just hear these sort of rootsy songs about, canoe trips or whatever. And then the door busted open and like 5 guys came running in. And what I remember seeing was like this sort of motley crew of bizarrely dressed characters, and Jamie Julian, the bass player, wearing a top hat with the top cut out of it and his hair sticking out the top of it. And they launched into some song, a Dig Circus song, that I think hit us like a tidal wave, or like a aftershock of an atomic bomb or something. It was like all this other sort of folky crap. And then their thing, which was sort of, I don't know what, it was like folk and punk and funk and, all mixed together. And we had been doing our 3-piece acoustic thing with Dave on a stand-up snare. So I remember that being the beginning of a huge friendship with them. But So Long Bernie, I remember as we got to know those guys, there was a guy in their high school that they had known, it was one of their friend group, and then had this sort of secret life and wound up getting arrested for, I can't remember exactly what, but it was a sexual assault, or it wasn't a murder, but it was a sexual assault or something horrible that they had no idea. And also sort of like, he seemed like such a nice guy. Like he seemed like the last person who would be involved in that. And I remember just kicking that around in my mind about like, how well do we know the people around us? And so that was where that came from. And then that was, I think, one of the great things that came out of us doing those stand-up shows, which is that this kind of taking a totally acoustic format, but kind of punking it up, a la our buddies in Weddings, Parties, Anything, or the Pogues, or the people that we were inspired by then.
I mean, I think the trajectory in those days started where you're talking, which is at the open stages that we would do on a very regular basis. And yeah, we sat through a slog. Like there was a lot of drinking and sort of like looking at each other sideways. Like I remember the one that I think was the, and I hate to call somebody out if they happen to be watching, I apologize, but there was a guy who had a song called I Have a Plethora of Love. And I remember that, and I was like, okay, we're probably done with these open stages now. I don't think I can do this anymore. And so, but you're right, because the what we developed with the 2 acoustic guitars and a snare drum, and then eventually Arnott joins and adds adds 4-string bass to that. That took us to the Blue Moon, where, I think that's got to be the starting point of what the band's success was, because we were going in there. It was just the right moment at the right time, as far as people were anxious to go out and see live music. They didn't really give a shit what it was. They were going to go and sit in a room and watch and be involved. And so we did 9 months of 5-night residencies once a month. And after that was done, when I think the 9 months ended at New Year's Eve that year, so it must have been 91, I guess. And that then we could do no wrong in Toronto, and that soon after that we went across Canada, and then it just kind of, that was it. But we could never go back to anything that small anymore, because there was just too much of a demand for.
But I remember
rooms.
yearning to do that. As you said, the first out of town show being the Toucan in Kingston, which I think is 80 people or something, like very small for a venue.
There wasn't that many people there by any means, but the first time, yeah.
But and I remember that's the thing that set us apart from other bands, was that I know a lot of other bands aspired to halls or theaters or whatever, and I know that we always felt at home in that situation where like you might turn around and somebody would be behind you, because there would be no stage, and you would just be in a bar with people, like-minded people with our community. And I think was a major calling card for our band, is from the very beginning. And I don't think we ever sat down and made it part of a manifesto or anything, but it was sort of like we were just people who understood that we wanted to be part of a community.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, we had that great sort of, I always say, like sort of freaks and geeks. We had a real collection of weirdos and outcasts and, you know, people who liked the same kind of music we did. And the tighter and more intimate, the better, I think, right?
Oh, it became sort of a mini Grateful Dead at that point, where the same people, and it would just grow and grow and grow, but the same people were coming to every show, and then
Yep.
there'd be more of them and more of them. And I think there was a very noticeable point where a lot of those original people felt, oh, this isn't for me anymore because it's gotten too big, and I don't have that connection to the band anymore. And so then that's when it just kind of exploded. And at that point, we were getting like, you know, 4 songs played a day on CFMY, and then, you know, we were at that point we were playing. You know, there must have been times if we were doing if those 3 years we did 250 plus shows a year, we probably did 80 in Toronto. Like
Yeah.
that's absurd. Like that's absurd to think we did. But
Well, impossible now, but
yeah, impossible now. But every one of them was full.
yeah.
Like it was just there wasn't we were protective of the idea of not overplaying. So the idea that we kept doing it meant that people were coming. So it's pretty.
I also
cool.
feel like it, stepping out of those places, and this is not a good business model for anybody in a band, but I think stepping out of those places into bigger venues was almost the beginning. You could feel the beginning of the dissatisfaction of the band winding up in places that we didn't feel comfortable in or didn't feel reflected us or something. But I mean, I don't know how you would make a career out of only playing places the size of the Blue Moon, but
Well, no, you wouldn't. But I think what, you know, in hindsight, I tell this story to friends a lot, that we did a tour out west, and it was probably like the 4th or 5th time that year we'd gone west. It was, I remember this because we were very proud of this number, but it was 44 dates in 46 days. So we had 2 days off on that whole tour. We got back probably on a Sunday night, and we got a phone
I
call.
was never very good at math.
40, what did I say?
You said 42 gigs in 46 days. We had 2 days off.
No, 44 dates in 46. It was 2 days
It's
off.
getting better at math.
Yeah. And we got back, and I think the day after that, we got a call from whoever was managing us at that point. I think it was Frank. And he said, the Violent Femmes are offering you an opening slot going west. And I remember, like, to the detriment of the band, I was like, okay, let's go. And it was probably starting like a week later. It was like literally getting back in the van and going back on the road. And you and Dave were like, no, we're not doing that. And I was like, what? That's what we do.
It's the Violent Femmes.
That's what we do. And this is the Violent Femmes. But I think in hindsight, some tempering of our schedule might have added a little more longevity at that period of time. Like, it was just, I mean, if you were, like, we're a well-rehearsed band too, and we made 2 records during that period of time. So between recording, playing 250 shows a year, and rehearsing, like, what else do we do? Like, we couldn't have done anything else. There was no more days left in the year to do something.
We got drunk a lot.
We got drunk, yeah. And I remember we did take one December off, and then you and I both separately headed to Europe, and you ended up in a phone booth or something because you ran out of money, or a bank machine because you ran out of money. But I had a great time on that trip, and it was.
I had a great time in that phone booth.
Yeah, but that was a good break, and that felt very refreshing. We came back. I remember we came back. We had a show at the Phoenix, and felt great coming back from a month. So maybe if we'd done that more, we would have had. Maybe we wouldn't be sitting here now. Maybe standing.
We would be standing here now. Standing room only.
Standing in the dark.
We're only on song 2. Like, this is gonna, like, what are you making? Like a 3-hour Shakespeare in My Blood documentary?
Actually, you just check.
Oh,
Oh my God. Just about the only blues?
you rolling?
Just about the only blues?
Down the road.
Well, I would just start by saying this, that we're literally just sitting like a couple blocks away from the Only right now at Sauce on Danforth. But other than that, for me, it's funny because, like, I remember the entire vibe of making that record. I remember how we did it going in at night. I remember very specifically that when I was recording guitars, I was in a Foley booth. And so there was very few places I could stand because otherwise I was standing on pebbles or sand or glass. And I would sort of stand off to the side and play, and the amps were in the room, and
Damp was in the room with you.
was in the room with me. Oh yeah.
Wow.
There was one song that I forget which song it was, but I played some acoustic guitar on it, and I was in that room sitting on a chair, and we worked on that acoustic part for such a long time. This has never happened since that day. When I went home that night, I was like, "Oh, that's weird." And like I'd lost all the feeling in my right leg because the guitar was leaning into it for so long, and it was like it went on for like weeks. I was like, oh, like have I done nerve damage from recording? But yeah, like we worked
Because you were probably trying not to fall into the.
to
You were probably
the glass pit.
literally trying not to fall into the gravel too.
Well, we did fall into the gravel a few times on this in those days. But yeah, so you go the song.
Well, I was going to say too. Well, so yeah, the song. I guess as I was saying about 4 o'clock stop, I guess it would have been when all of this stuff was starting to occur to me. Like, hey, this is this is CBGB's to us, right? This is not, this is a place where that's a hallowed place where lots of people we know go. For me, I remember in the 80s, in the late 80s, when we were still in Popular Front, there wasn't a lot of places in the East End you could go that weren't, as Greg Smith refers to, kick and stabs. There were pretty rough places out in the East End. So I remember walking to the only cafe when it was just the long, skinny bar and seeing people playing chess and hearing the kinds of conversations that were going on. And I'm like, I smell Bolsheviks in here. It was like, these are my people. And just, going in there and finding out that, it was sort of frequented again by sort of like leftists and hippies and weirdos and punks and just going, well, this is my place, right? This is our tribe. So going in there and hanging out and having a lot of kind of crazy nights in there. And then it occurring to me that, these are the kind of places that are sacred to us. These are the kind of places that, we should write a song about this place, right? And then doing so. And then I remember, it's funny because I remember by the time we released that record, I had moved west and we were all living out in the West End. So none of us were really coming to the Only much. And I was in there one night and I think Dean was still owned the bar, and he took me aside and said, oh my God, every weekend there are people coming in here, thinking that they might see the band, and it's been so great for business. I want to extend a tab to you and all your friends. And I went, yoink. I was like, have you ever met our friends and the band? And I think that lasted 6 months or something. And he took me aside at another point. He said, Ron, I need to have a conversation. And I was like, you don't even have to say it.
That lifetime you were talking about, it ended.
Yeah. You drank enough to kill this many people. And so he yanked that one out from under us. But it was like, and then I remember what the shot of Chairman Mao, let's get a table beneath the shot of Chairman Mao. So that.
What's the story? What supposedly happened to that photo?
So it disappeared.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine somebody that was a fan of the band stole it. But somehow a rumor got around that we had stolen it. And then I was in there one time with Larry from Dig Circus and Kathleen and Claudette, and we went in there, and I remember carrying Larry in there on my back because, you just did stuff like that. You guys are banned, get out of here. And it turned out that I think he was projecting some anger based around the fact that this had happened and that he had thought that the Low had stolen the picture. And it never got unraveled. And then he sold the bar to somebody else before I got back to find it out. And I don't think the mystery has never been solved. Who stole that?
So somebody has that photo somewhere,
Yeah, and then that one, I think, that's, again, a touchstone. I think that became a cornerstone of that record because people, it seems to be counterintuitive, but the idea that the more microscopic you write, the more universal it becomes.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
The idea of a small bar like that, how many people actually would have been there when they heard that song is probably 1%, if. So what's happening is they're identifying with something in their life that means that much to them, and and then it was later on that these sort of pilgrimages started of people doing the Ron Hawkins reality tours in Toronto, going to the Carlisle Bridge and kind of going, oh yeah, so this is a
reality tour.
That's the Peterman reality tour.
The sad reality tour. Yeah.
Sad reality tour. Yeah. I wish I remembered more about recording the particular songs, but maybe as we go there'll be things that pop out. But that one, I just think
I never liked my guitar sound on that song.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of guitars. So that's an interesting part of Shakespeare for me. Is a lot of my when we started making that record, the only guitar I had was a Fender Strat, and during the making that record, I bought the Gretsch that I have, and I've never played a Strat since. I kind of hate Strats, and so that's maybe a mistake on my part because obviously that's a sound people liked because the album did well. But I really didn't like Strats, and I don't know why I had a Strat. And then once I got the Gretsch, it was like
Clearly, you dislike people.
I dislike people, yeah. But I sold that Strat right away and never looked back. I've never even considered having another one. It was all Les Pauls and other sort of.
And we've been over the, the fact that Dave wound up, recording 3 albums worth of music in a day.
In a day.
Because none of us knew that you weren't supposed to do that per se.
We did all the drums at Metalworks in one day. So Dave did 16 songs straight in one day. And I remember at Metalworks there was a back room that had a basketball court in it. And at one point we took a break and we all went out and played basketball for a little while in this back. It was indoors. And I remember finishing the basketball game and going, oh my God, I'm just exhausted. I can't do this anymore. And I'm like, okay, maybe I should keep that to myself. This guy's like putting down 16 tracks of drums and, amazing that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like that we spent money on one day. I mean, and honestly, that's probably the extent of what we spent on that record as far as studio
Oh yeah,
time
because
goes.
Andy didn't charge us.
We did it all free at Film
An
House.
interesting aside, the basketball game ended 0-0 because none of us could play basketball.
I'm a terrible basketball player. Yeah.
Andy says that he lent some guitars too. He would have had some guitars.
Oh, yeah.
Sitting around.
But he was a Strat guy too. Like he had a really nice. It was a Japanese company. I forget what.
Takai?
Takai maybe. Yeah, he had a really nice Strat.
Like he said he had an 800. He still had. He pointed at it while I was interviewing him.
We had lots of amps. Like my amp at that point was a Marshall tube combo, an 800 combo. I wish I'd never sold. It was great. So I think most of my stuff on that record was played through a Marshall, and yours was probably the Fender amp, right? At that point.
Yeah, and mine was not a good Fender though. It was like a transistor.
Right.
Was not a tube amp.
Did we use it on the album?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we did. See my earlier comment.
But the same acoustic you have now, right?
Yeah. Same
that's
tack I
amazing.
had since 1988.
Yeah, that's a testimonial to Takaminis. So they last that long.
It's a Takamine testimonial.
Takamine.
Right here.
This is a Takamine testimonial. Yeah.
Salesmen, cheats, and liars. And we don't need to go into the Molson Canadian story because that didn't happen until I think until like well into Lucid Junior, right? After, right?
I don't know, but yeah, sure. Well, I will go on the record as saying Salesmen, Cheats, and Liars is probably one of the best examples of, I'd say that and Rosie and Gray maybe, of this kind of psychic guitar dance that you and I have done.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of perfect, I think, Salesmen.
Yeah.
And I said this maybe earlier in the doc, which is that, and I'll say it to you now, I so appreciate all the work you did on that record and the genius with which you put those parts together. Because as I said in the doc, like you're so busy, as you know, you're so busy working with people, fighting with them, enjoying crazy situations with them that you never really, and we're young and you never really stopped to go, hey man, that was incredible work. But those songs, like those lines, especially in Shakespeare and on Salesman, when that kicks in, like that's, I think, some of your best work. Like it's such a defining guitar line.
It's so like sort of amazingly organic too, because I think if that was the style that I've carried forward, like it didn't develop much before that. Like I don't remember.
Yeah, it seemed to like a lot of things. It seemed to come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. I think that might be the defining thing of that record is that we had done lots of work together.
Yeah.
And we had done lots of good stuff. Some of that stuff has come back in later Lowest Low records and sort of gotten a light shone on it and have become some of the favorite songs on those later records. So it's not like we were doing a bad job before that. It was just like suddenly something exploded in the, as we say, is this autobiographical approach to lyrics, and then you completely forming this style that you didn't have before that?
We talk, I remember specifically you and I talking about this back in the day about the idea of understanding your limitations and not trying to be, something that you're not, whether it's as a lyricist or as a player. And I think that was very much the way I approached it, because it was like I knew.
How did that get voiced? Was that like, when you're saying that about a person understanding their own limits, I assume back in that day it was you telling me my limits and me telling you your limits.
No, but
I understand your
I think
limits.
it was more a mutual discussion of like the idea that we were good at understanding our limits. So like
Right.
one thing about, and I don't know, I can't speak for all young bands, but when we were in a young band at that point, I remember the cool part of it was you would do the shows, and then you and I would get on the phone the next day and dissect everything, and we'd talk about what had gone right, what had gone wrong, why things were going as they were, and there was just time to sort of languish in it and sort of to try to figure out what it was all about. And I think that was important realization for me, is like I wasn't going to be like Eddie Van Halen. I wasn't going to be a shredder. I wasn't even particularly like a prolific live player. But what I did understand was melody and counterpoint, and I think that's what I was always trying to bring to the songs, just innately. It wasn't like oh, this needs to be like some crazy solo. Like the solos on that record, most of them, there's a couple where it gets a little bit whittly, but for the most part, it's just like another melody that happens during the song. So
Yeah, I think we both sort of approach guitar solos like that, like write them like a singer.
yeah, exactly.
So obviously it helps that you're a singer, you
Yeah.
know, because you can think in that term. And I think that because we're both Clash fans, and I think Mick Jones, I always talk about the solo in Tommy Gun, which is literally 2 guitar notes.
Yeah.
And the chords change under it. So
Yeah.
like the movement actually comes from where the chords go. And then he had the sense to go, well, I don't really have to go anywhere. I can just sit on this thing, and almost like the more I sit on it, the more the amazing tension builds
It just
up around
grows,
it.
grows, yeah. So cool.
And I remember us being not just not wanting to be shredders or not thinking we could become shredders, but having a great disdain for shredders.
Yeah.
You know, as sort of like masturbation, or just sort of like, if you have nothing to say, then just you say a lot. you
Yeah.
know? It's probably like, a guy, we're in a bar right now. It's probably, we always see the guy in the bar that's talking the most. You're like, he probably has the least to say.
Yeah.
That's why he's talking so much.
Talking so much, yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Another thing I love about Salesmen, Cheats, and Liars is, and again, I don't remember anything we did being a conscious thing. I think everything we did was pretty intuitive. Was that for some reason in Salesmen, Cheats, and Liars, the verse is the loudest part, and when we get to the chorus comes down in
Way down,
energy,
yeah.
which shouldn't work,
Yeah.
but totally works, obviously, and because that was one of our most
I
popular
mean,
songs.
and also like it was that record where we'd obviously been singing together for a while at that point, but we just found this sort of harmony space between our two voices, even though we sound like the Chipmunks at that age. But that the harmonies really like so you really hear them, and there's a real blend of our two voices at that moment of that song where everything else drops down. And I mean, obviously it resonates. That's one that's, I'm sure even to this day, you're like,
It's the most
yeah.
Shazammed
Yeah.
song that we have. Also, yeah, when we took those Shakespeare masters and put them up on the board again at Revolution, that's one of the things that struck me, as I always assumed we layered vocals because they're so lush.
Yeah.
And then you pull them back and go, oh, it's just me and Steve. And once in a while, a second Steve or a second
Yeah.
me or whatever.
Yeah,
It's
and there was
kinda
a couple
shocking.
songs where John did like a lower part, but that was it. Like yeah. Cut.
All right.
Mr. Director.
That was awesome.
Can we do a retake on that one? Yeah.
Just don't say John. Say Greg. Yeah. Rosie and Gray. Oh, that one.
I was just like, it's a cavalcade of hits.
What's
Just
a Rosie and Gray?
They keep coming.
I never want to hear that song again.
I played it on Friday night actually.
I never want to sing that song again. You have to come to every show and sing that
Just
song.
sing the song.
Here it is.
It's the soundtrack of our youth.
I think this is one of the first ones that I played a Gretsch on, though. That lead's definitely on the Gretsch. Like that's, yeah. That was a good thing I got that guitar when I did, because it would have been a different vibe on a Strat. Strat is such a. I think my disdain for Eric Clapton was in full bloom at that point, and I was like, I can't play a Strat just because if I identify at all with this guy, I'm in big trouble. At that point, I didn't know about all his.
Didn't know what a horrible human
what a
being
horrible
he was.
human
You were
he
just
was,
talking
but-
about his horrible guitar playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rosie and Gray. So that's become the one that we talk about, sort of, the pot of gold, albatross around our neck kind of situation. The be careful what you wish for, but having a big identifying hit. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I've sort of ridden a kind of a skateboard through my life with that song, in terms of like there have been times when, obviously, when it hit and it became a big defining song for us, that was amazing and exciting. And then as we went on, it became like, really, it was something we just had to play all the time.
Yeah.
And then as we broke out and did solo shows and reunited and broke up again and reunited, like just became that thing where it's like, it's identified with us so intensely. And the mythology around it is so hilarious, because I have a bunch of different stories in which the most interesting one being Kathleen, a friend of ours. Kathleen was working at a, what do you call them? Students go and hang out in them in
Coffee
Europe.
shop?
I was going to say brothel, but
Well,
that's not what they're
that's
called.
true too. You mean a?
Speaking.
No, it
No,
used
like,
to be.
Not a hotel,
The
but like,
cabana room became one
yeah,
for trekkers.
Hostile.
a
Hostel.
hostel,
Yeah.
not a brothel. A hostel. So she was working in a hostel in Italy, and she was playing Shakespeare in My Butt behind the desk, the concierge desk or whatever. And some Australian backpacker came through and heard it and said, "How do you know that song?" And she said, "My boyfriend wrote this song." And she's like, "No, he didn't." And she's like, "Yeah, I can assure you that he did." And the woman said that this is an old Australian folk song. And it was like, because, our friends' weddings, parties, anything, took the record back to Australia when it hit, and also covered Rosie and Gray and made it a big hit in Australia. So it became, it was just so hilarious to be, in Europe, she's working in a place, meet somebody from across the world who thinks that's an old Australian folk song. So, it means that it has the kind of gravitas that an old traditional song might have, which is kind of cool, but also just so weird. Like, it's so Toronto specific.
It's like the whole idea about how music takes on a life of its own that you no longer control when a song gets to that sort of level of popularity, where it's having, parallel meanings to so many people, probably all slightly different, but I was driving back from a gig in Kingston with Chris Bennett the other day, and that morning I said, "Oh, we should download some XTC so we can listen to it on the way." And we listened to English Settlement, and we were listening away, and we were both kind of bopping away to it, and I said, is there any better legacy than the idea that two guys are driving down the road listening to an album that was made in '85 and like going, "This is so good." Like Chris kept saying, "Fuck, the drumming on this record is so good," and I said, "Yeah, well, the drumming is part of it. The guitar playing is amazing too." But I think when a song or an album makes that leap into people's consciousness, that it lasts forever, I think as a writer or as a band or whatever, it's hard to quantify that. It's hard to even,
Well, it's impossible. It's impossible for me. I'm sure it's impossible for you to get your head around that something you created could mean that. Because, you know me well, and you know that I don't lack confidence, but at the same time, there's a certain level of, ego or whatever that it takes to expect that could happen. It should be a surprise to you that, it's like that something could be that meaningful.
Yeah.
The other thing I love about that song is that it was the first time we started to play with this idea of, like, that last verse about cunnilingus. Couched in a certain playful way. I always talk about that. Like, I know that we used to like to put little Easter eggs in our songs, and that even when that was on the radio, I know that sort of tweaked a bunch of people I know that we, just to say that, there's 4 feminists in this band, we're allies, we know where all the parts are, and that matters to us. You know what I mean? Like, little things like that, I think, were sort of political Easter eggs in our songs that it could just be seen as a ridiculous joke.
Yeah.
But I think it meant more, and there's a bunch of things like that scattered throughout Shakespeare that are, I think meant to be a little political. I mean, reverse dog whistles, they would be, progressive dog whistles.
And also the idea that existed as a radio song with like an intro that went on for about a minute, like that's unheard of at that time. I mean, it's like
And that couched our whole "fuck you" attitude. That I don't know where we got that from, because it's so funny because we spent the 10 years before that trying to be successful. And then the minute we got an opportunity to be successful, we suddenly just were completely the DIY punks that we totally are, and just went, yeah, fuck, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like either it's completely on our terms or it doesn't fly.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a strange.
No, but I always felt that at least at that moment in time, our collective instincts were bang on.
Yeah.
What we were doing was just sort of completely from the heart. Wasn't sort of listening to anybody's trends or anybody's ideas on what should be followed. That changed by default once we got through Shakespeare and moved on to Hallucigenia, because there were so many other people involved. And that's the biggest cliche in music, I know, but it really is true that like the outside, the external sort of voices saying, oh, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, really had, helped to accelerate us towards early '95, where we called it quits, right? Just because there was just too much coming from too many directions.
Well, and until then we had maintained the sort of insular gang mentality that, people, I mean, and I'm sorry to anyone that we put through hell back in 1991, but like you really had to fight your way into that group, I'm a little hurt that there was no confrontation about the dinosaur pants, that nobody wrestled me to the ground and pulled those purple dinosaur pants
They were a staple.
and burned them. Mentioned in the movie.
Kinda the lonely one.
So kind of the only one is on the CD, not on the cassette, because the cassette could only have 15 songs because of the length of the record, which the entire length of the record is what, 71 minutes, something like that? Mm-hmm. Like
We were so ahead of the curve that
it's a double album.
they had to invent new technology to
But
hold the amount of music.
So that's an interesting story too, because like we were talking about a moment in time when vinyl was just breathing its last breath of its first time around.
Or was it?
Or was it? But exactly. But so like if we put that album out 1 year before, it would have come out on vinyl.
Right.
Early '91, we still questioned. We argued a lot about what format to put it out on, and what we ended up landing on was doing both cassettes and CDs. And the cassettes we did I think we did 2,000, and I probably have 40 of them still in my house. And
am I wrong to say that there was a big chance that we weren't going to make CDs, right? There was a chance that we were just going to make cassettes, right?
And I think, at that moment in time, especially in the Canadian music business, that a lot of bands weren't making CDs yet. And we decided that it was the way to go. And I think it probably, kept us solvent for the next few years, because we were probably selling 100 a show off the stage. And we had a record deal that I think to this day is unheard of, where we were buying CDs at $4 a piece from the label, which meant we were doing like $11 profit on a CD, which I think was unheard of. Like, I mean, so I remember hearing
So why
stories.
were we broke all the time?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly, to this day. But you hear stories about like that Sting's deal was he was getting $1.50 a CD or something like that. We were getting $11 a CD. So
Take that, Sting.
but obviously we weren't selling at the level of Sting, but
Yeah.
yet.
He feels sorry for us, I think. Poor Gordon Sumner.
Anyways, the song.
That song, I feel like that song is a companion piece to Under the Carlisle Bridge, because there are elements, of course, when I say autobiography, I always talk about how, there's no true autobiography. There's fiction in every autobiography. There's biography in every fiction, because that's how it informs your writing. Obviously, you write from a place of knowing things, if it comes across as real. And I think I meant to write Kind of the Lonely One as a piece to my friend Ken, we had been through politics together, and he had been the guitar player in Social Insecurity with me and Dave. And just, it was a process of, he's one of my oldest friends and one of those friends we've weathered a lot of storms. You won't recognize this trope at all. But we've recognized that we've weathered a lot of storms together, and but he's one of my closest friends I've ever had. And so there have been moments where we've kind of trying to figure out what our relationship really is and everything. And I think I was doing that on that song. And then Under the Carlisle Bridge has elements of social insecurity in it, because that's social insecurity. We used to have our band meetings at the Donut Express, or the Donut Rose, which was in across from the Carlisle Mall there, the towers or whatever it was, right beside the Carlisle Bridge. So I have great memories of us, trudging along in the snow with our guitars, talking about changing the world with music. But kind of the lonely one being started out with the idea of that, me talking to Ken about our relationship. And then of course it goes into other areas and other things that we had accumulated in that time. Again, I just remember because we were young and in a band that was starting to take off, and regardless of whether it was taking off or not, we were in a band that was committed, as you say, we were rehearsing, I don't know, not every day maybe, but close to every day. And if we weren't rehearsing, we were hanging out.
Yeah.
And we were hanging out with a community of other misfits that were hanging out or quit school or left their jobs or whatever they were doing and had time to hang out. And that's a really great school of its own. Like, that's a great way to just sit around and chew over ideas. And so I remember that was all just piling onto the songs, because you would just get snippets of interesting stuff and different worldviews every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that one also has I think one of the times where I think we were these kind of musical mongrels where we would pick up ideas, like you talk about listening to XTC, and I'm sure this happened to you, which is that you would pick up fairly sophisticated musical ideas and fairly sophisticated musical training that you would put in your own songs. When somebody might ask you, like, well, how did you know how to change time signatures in the middle of a song? Or how did you know how to drop a bar for some kind of tension before you go into, and it's like, I don't know, just by being a sponge, by walking around, being interested in music.
By listening,
And other bands did it. XTC did it a lot, I'm sure. And Talking Heads, and just people that are smarter than us musically. It all goes in there, and you don't know what it is you're doing, but you know you heard it and you liked it, you know?
That song, to me, is one of the really good examples of what I was talking about earlier on, about how precise the playing is on that record. Like, it moves fast. Those parts move, and there's a lot of precision in the notes that are chosen to. And then I think that's also one of the ones where we really were finding the space between our two voices. There's a lot of interplay on that song. So,
and I don't know who did this, if it was you or me, or probably wouldn't have been Dave, just because of the music, like the musical notes of it. But the part in the middle that goes dun 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 dun, like in the like one of us decided we should do that, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's a bit weird. But what I love about us in that moment is that it, we may have kicked it, debated it a little bit, but once we were on it, then everybody jumped on it. And as you say, then locked it in.
It becomes very precise. Yeah. I mean, like, that goes back to how much time we were. I mean, even back to Popular Front, like, that was band. We rehearsed a lot. Like, it was like I remember we had a jam space at a friend's place, like at Shepherd and near York University, and we would borrow your dad's work van and head up after work, like, almost every day. We were up there all the time. That woman must have lost her mind.
Back in the days when you're like, when it didn't occur to you, well, they must have rehearsal spaces within a 80-kilometer.
Remember that one time we were in your dad's van, and the ladder on top came loose and had swung around and was parallel, and like people are honking at us from all sides, and we're like, "What? What's wrong?"
And it became a helicopter, and it rose off the ground, and we.
But that's a nice little metaphor for how much we were constantly flying by the seat of our pants in those days. Like, just
like, think about that now. To call everybody in the band and go, I'm going to go over and borrow my dad's van. And then we're going to pick everybody up, and then we're going to drive to Shepherd and Keele, which for people who aren't from Toronto is a long way away from where we lived. And rehearse for 2.5, 3 hours.
3 hours,
and then pile into that same van and drop everybody off, and then drop that van back at my dad's place. It's crazy. It's insane.
But there was no complaints. Like, we were just, that's what we were doing. And
except for my dad and the person who we were rehearsing it.
Yeah, I don't even know how we were paying for gas. Like we were all at that moment in time, we would have all had some kind of crappy day job we had to get up for the next morning. So, yeah, that was like in the curtain hanging days.
Don't try this at home, kids.
Yeah.
Eternal Fatalist.
It is
Eternal
just
Fatalist.
banger after banger.
Yeah, it's just like it's a collection of hits. Eternal Fatalist for me was probably my favorite song to play live, and I think it was a showstopper in the best sense of the word as far as that goes. And also, like, I think another example of what we've been talking about throughout, about two guitars that just work beautifully together. That sort of higher part that I came up with, that's sort of like a melody under the melody, and then you're doing like a sort of more of it's kind of like a Joe Strummer kind of feel where you're catching parts of what I'm doing, but sort of stopping before it capitulates, and it's just got this really cool sort of push and pull feel to it.
Yeah. Well, funny that speaking of the Clash, that I remember hearing about their cover of Police and Thieves.
Yeah.
And how Mick Jones, Joe Strummer would say that Mick Jones just had a musical mind for, like, I want you to go, and then cut it, and then I'm going to go, so the guitars would do this thing.
Yeah.
And I think, again, just from listening to a lot of different kinds of music and from having that all go into your brain, it's in there, and then if you can access it, and if it seems relevant. But yeah, when you say showstopper, what I remember about that song is by the time we had hits on the radio, and then suddenly the place was full of frat boys, and we were like, who are these people and why are they at our show? It was a showstopper in a lot of bad ways as well too, because I remember that we had that thing where we would stop on a dime, and because always some dude was causing trouble for everybody up front, either squishing, people, like, all the women in the front, like squishing them against the thing, or just, slam dancing.
Yeah.
And we would stop and either, try to discipline this person, or eventually try to throw them out if it came to
Threw
that.
a lot of people out of
threw them
shows.
out.
They just,
And
that
then
was
back in,
That was all part of everything we're talking about with the acceleration towards death, because the audience kind of got taken over by an element that, we're totally into the music, but we're not, didn't have a clue what we were actually singing about. They were there for their own purposes, and so it often went into territories that were just damn ugly. And so we had a lot of people.
But maybe to be devil's advocate on this one thing is that I can understand, like, we asked a lot of people, which is that we dressed it up. Like you talk about Eternal Fatalist, that song was a roof raiser, right? So, we asked people to get swept up in the velocity of that song, and yet, have enough compassion for the people around them to not kill anybody, or, or.
No, I mean, so one of the ones, I'm not sure where this is in the whole history of the band, and we're going to talk about Bleed a Little Wild Tonight later, but I remember we were playing Bleed a Little Wild Tonight in Buffalo, and we got to like the solo section of the song, and like, if there's a love song in the lowest of the low canon, that's it. And all of a sudden, like right in front of us, is 4 or 5 guys got into a full-on like fist fight, and we stopped the show, stopped the song, and we were
The
like,
title, Steve.
So what you're suggesting is a literal interpretation of it.
Some people are a little more literal than other people. But yeah,
it's like, well, no, I remember when we got involved in Artists Against War, and it was right at the beginning of the internet, and to all of us in the band, like, we'd been singing about that from day one, and that was sort of our whole manifesto, and we got like just reams and reams of online hate mail about our anti-Iraq war stance. It's like, well, what have you been listening to for
what
the
stance did you think we were going to have? Well, and flash forward to COVID, and I got a death threat from somebody who referred to the low as woke scum, which would have been one thing of its own, and then to look into it and find out that this is a person that is pretty much a 30-year fan of the band. That's when it really became,
Yeah. I mean, the reality is people can take whatever they want away from music, and it probably often is nothing to do with the lyrical message. It's just.
Oh yeah, and this is what I mean by I don't want to be devil's advocate really, because they were a bunch of douchey dudes, but just that, we were presenting as a very ferocious band.
Yeah.
And and the modeling we were giving people was like, wow, those guys are going to get as drunk as they possibly can and still do the job,
Yeah.
and maybe sometimes not do the job. So we might have been sending some mixed messages as well, but yeah. But I remember that song being one of the throw the bums out tunes.
Yeah, for sure.
Subversives.
Subversives. Oh, okay. So I remember Subversives coming. Subversives is one of those borderline tunes, like it was almost a Popular Front tune in terms of like, I think I wrote it in '89,
Yeah.
kind of just about, or maybe '90, whatever. But it was like, I remember my partner at the time, Elena, went to New York with some friends or whatever, and I had one of those scenarios. I had a dream that there would be a plane crash or something, and I'm not usually particularly, as you know from the former song, a fatalist or a person who believes in omens or whatever, but it really sat with me in a weird way that felt so uncomfortable and so real that I started to imagine what my life would be like without her. And that song came out of it. And of course she came back and everything was fine. And then we broke up, and and then I had this song. But it was from that, was like taking stock of what that relationship meant to me. And then I think it kind of became also, as I say, some kernel like that starts the song, and then you start to bring other things in, like all the people I know around me and the community that we have, and talking about that. There's something subversive about the way we live, which is that everything is being monetized and commodified all around us all the time, except in this little world that we've created. We can't escape it because we live inside it, but at the same time, we would do everything we could to do things that we wanted to do about art for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Sometimes to our own detriment, but
Well, I think probably if you're talking about, I mean, you guys carry on now and very successfully, but if you're talking about sort of an eye on longevity and a business model, that was just nothing. We didn't consider that at all. It was very much about what's the next day going to look like, and how is what the decision we're making going to support the art we're creating. And there were lots of bands that were contemporaries of ours that had much more wrought out plans for what they were going to do with their careers and how they were going to monetize it, and probably had management that was helping them develop those plans. We chose a real sort of a rogues gallery of managers for sure, but they all sort of, at that moment in time we worked with them, they all really supported the idea of what we were, which was very much an in-the-moment band, and we wanted to, it was really all about creating a live experience that people would leave and go, I gotta go see that again. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably all we ever considered. Beyond songwriting, the songwriting was obviously very important, and the creation.
No, but I mean, the songwriting was informed by that attitude. The band manifesto, such as it may have been, was informed by that attitude. Who we booked to play with us was informed by that. How we would go out and watch the opening band from the mosh pit with the crowd. Every single thing we did was unified with the same kind of philosophy. And I would say, you say, the band's gone on and been successful as well. But, like what I think we had a rehearsal two Mondays ago, and I was talking about, we were talking about paying for a photo shoot or something, and Dave said, good, we've got exactly enough money in the bank account to do that. And it was like $400 or something, right? And I just, shook my head and I was like, I love this band.
Yeah.
It's like, it's 35 years
never changes,
later,
right?
and
Yeah.
we're still like, we've got what is important to us, which is the respect and the longevity and the legacy of our band. But we still can kind of not rub two dimes together most of the time.
You just said something that really reminded me of a story that I tell friends all the time about touring with a band like with the Cadillac Tramps. They're our friends from Orange County, and how good they were live. They were just to me probably to this day the best live band I've ever seen in my life. And I remember, so we did, I think 2 or 3 tours with them in Canada where they opened for us, and then we did one in America where we opened for them. And we were at the Town Pump in Vancouver, and they were on stage before our set. It was a 3-night stand we were doing there, and we were all in the crowd, and I'm standing there just totally like loving them, and I love those guys so much, and just watching them play and do what they did was like a miracle every night. And this guy walked up beside me and goes, why would you have a band like this open for you? Like basically insinuating like you're insane because you're gonna get blown off the stage. And I was like, dude, like you've got it backwards completely. This is exactly what you want. I mean, first of all, to me, it was never and has never been a competition. So if somebody blows you off the stage, like good for them, like that's great. But what happened with us is we would watch, and we, like you said, we were students. Like we weren't like hanging out in the dressing room when bands we loved were playing. We were out there with the crowd watching it, and then we'd go up and fucking take our energy to a whole other level. And those were the nights where we would sort of like, take quantum leaps when all of a sudden we got pushed by somebody to go, okay, like, yeah, I see what they're doing, and we'd take it and reinterpret it in our own way, and we
We'll also just feed you like guys, we have two choices. We go out to the van, put the jumper cables on our nipples, and do that before we play, or we would have the Cadillac Tramps open for us. Or, and I would say in various levels of energy-wise, like Dig Circus did the same thing for us, Sour Landslide, all these bands that we chose and we continue to do today. I told you about the Sky Wallace thing, where we played with Sky Wallace, and it was like, in our long careers of playing with people, there's a handful of people that you see them instantly, and then suddenly you realize, oh, this is kind of family. And then you realize after sound check, oh, half your band has gone off with half their band to eat, and then two other people have gone, they're talking in the dressing room, and that kind of thing happens. And and those Cadillac Tramp dudes, like, what lightning in a bottle. Like, this is an interesting thing about their band, very similar to our band, and maybe that's why it worked. I saw a documentary about them in which a lot of the choices they made for the right reasons for them and everything, they were huge in Orange County. Like, they were the band in Orange County. And then all the people that opened for them, no doubt.
Pearl Jam,
all these bands opened for them and then sort of superseded them in popularity or fame or whatever, however you want to put it. But all still talk so incredibly in hush whispered about the Cadillac Tramps because of what a force they were,
Yeah.
And I think that circles back to what I'm saying about, Dave says we only have enough money for one more photo shoot last Monday, and I'm like, and it doesn't scare me and it doesn't freak me out and it doesn't make me bitter. It makes me go like, I love that we're still doing this, and we're still doing it the way we want to do it, and it's, it's on a bit of a wing and a prayer, but it always was.
It's the music business, yeah, for sure. Can we stop for 1 second? Let me just grab my drink quickly.
Everything. Only 3 cameras. Bleed a little while, I think. Yes.
Well, there you go. Bleed a Little While Tonight. That was the ultimate fight song, apparently. Yeah, I like this one was one that I think really, from my point of view, I really kind of nailed the guitar part, and it just really helps tell the story. It's like, I think it's such a lilting, there's a lot of emotion in the guitar itself in that one, which I was proud of.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about, like, from the first note, for the first couple of notes, people recognize what it is, and, that's a magic moment for any song. Yeah, people fighting. That's a good thing we didn't call it, like, bleed profusely from your face tonight or something. Who knows what would have happened, but. Yeah, that was one of the other ones, as we referenced from the very first song, from 4 O'Clock Stop, that was written from the space of this, however I want to put it, like, unfulfilled meeting of this person that, was a major bomb dropped into my life, because she was very intelligent, very had a worldview that was different than mine, and I found quite intriguing. And in that, as a songwriter, it's like I met her, I think, the night before she went to Czechoslovakia during that Velvet Revolution. She was going over there to check that all out and everything. And I being a Marxist, it was it was just like a stew of, like, she was kind of, I wouldn't say an anti-communist, but her obviously going to the Velvet Revolution was part of the kind of euphoria around getting Stalinism out of Eastern Europe, which of course I was euphoric about as well, because I'm not a Stalinist, but I did grow up as a Marxist. And so, that created a real sort of tense push and pull between us conversation-wise, and it was very romantic. There's no other way to put it, but like very romantic and very seductive. And for me as a songwriter, like if I couldn't write that song, then I might as well just hang up my. That's like the world gave me. The universe said, "Here you go.
Yeah.
You know, here's all the pieces. Just put that puzzle together." So so that was one of the other ones, you know, to put together. And you know, now when I look back in it, I have a combination of. I certainly wouldn't say embarrassment, but I would say like, you know, I look at the sort of maudlin youth and the sort of melancholy in it, you know, as sort of overblown or theatrical in a way that I may not have. I can't remember if I really felt it that intensely then, but you know, I'm also a songwriter, so.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was quite a trip to write that. And again, you know, I was freshly out of a relationship that had been an 8-year relationship, so I think I felt a combination of guilt around writing it, and as I say, sort of weird melancholy and excitement, all of this intense brew, you know. So I don't remember with you guys if I was making your lives hell around that whole scenario as well, just my melodramatic life at that point, but I can imagine I must have been insufferable to be around at times.
But I think we all had our own sort of personal dramas going on, so I think they were all kind of either canceling each other out or piling on top of one another. But yeah, I remember I have vague parts of that woman being like I mean I think I may have only saw her in person once. I think she came to a Blue Moon show on Bluer once, and I know that was a tough night for you that she was there. Because like I don't think it was ever a realized relationship, was it?
Well, it was without getting into the details, it was sort of like
That's what we're here. We're here to get into details.
it was not a relationship per se, but it was a prolonged dance, let's say.
Yeah.
And one of the things that that strikes me as funny now, and as I say, you know, it's not an element of embarrassment, but it's an element of an older person looking at a younger person, is that she also, I think, kind of hated our band. It was I think she kind of, like I know the kind of music that she dug when she was over there was this sort of pretty heavy jazz movement that was going on in Europe.
Right.
And I think she was a little underwhelmed by the sort of punky pop,
Fair enough.
folky pop
Well, yeah, man,
thing
it's
we
like-
were doing. And it's like, but the thing is, as a young man, all that did was like make it more attractive to me, because she spent a lot of time telling me sort of like, you're wasting your talents doing this, you should be writing books, or you should be writing, you know, which of course is demeaning what I actually do, which should be a problem,
Yeah.
but is also sort of like stroking my ego in that you're better than this thing that people tell you you're good at, you know? Like it's kind of,
Well,
again,
I mean, you know, I know at that period of time, with the amount of time we were spending together, one thing I do know is that we all knew each other's partners, and we knew each other's relationships, and the people that were in our lives were a part of the whole, you know, cast and crew. And she really
But not her. Yeah.
I never, like, I don't even know that I met her that night at the Blue Moon. So
there was also sort of there was a sense of a secret. Maybe that's just because of how I met her in the first place, and even though the relationship betrayal aspect of it wasn't on the table, maybe it just began a secret and it continued to be a secret, you know, until it wasn't a thing anymore.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's funny. I've talked to her. I've run into her later in life, and I've run into friends of hers and everything. And for her, I think it's a bit of an albatross as well, that it's known that she's the person who's in those songs. I don't think she found it awesome. I think she's been sort of like, it's been a bit of a pain in the ass, you know?
Yeah, I get that. Certainly, there's no financial reward on her side. So
No.
yeah.
I do send her a check every month, but
It's like Diddy sending Sting his $5,000
a week?
I don't. That's what they say.
A day.
It's a week, I think. But
Yeah.
I mean, or maybe it's even if it's a month. Like, what business model has that making sense? Like, I don't understand it. I don't understand it. If it's true, anyways.
And that song.
Yeah.
So we got about 45 minutes until 1:30.
We only got 42 songs left.
4, 5, 6, 7 songs to go. Bloodline's the next, and then I gotta change your hard drives.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's speed it up. I
Let's
mean,
do Bloodline, and then we'll might get into St. Brendan's Way, but yeah, Bloodline.
Bloodline, my one songwriting piece on this album, but I think that probably came out of the end of Popular Front, right? I think we kind of wrote that just before we made the
Yeah,
switch to,
there's a demo, a fairly well wrought demo from Popular
Yeah.
Front of Bloodline.
yeah, exactly. Bloodline has Tammy and Carolyn on it too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so those songs were kind of, I don't know that we ever played them live with Popular Front, but I don't remember that, but we maybe weren't playing live at that point. We'd XTC'd it up at that point. We're just a studio project. But just a story about a guy I met at, I grew up in Thorncliffe Park, and I was back visiting my parents and went to the shopping mall, and this guy pushing the stroller sidles up beside me and for no particular reason just launched into this racial epithet, and assuming that, you know, he and I were on the same side of whatever ideology he was espousing, and yeah, so that's where it came from. It's just like kind of watching that go down, and it was so completely like innate and innocuous on his side. He just sort of let it fly, and there was no reason for it. It just like it was like a guy walking up beside you and saying, "Boy, it's really hot out today, eh?" Like he walked up and just like let loose on that we were on team white supremacy. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And again, probably, you know, I mean, you know, I don't play it much anymore. It's like I think it's a little bit too idealized and a little bit too, you know, I like a more complex lyrical situation now than that was. But anyways,
That's funny about those kinds of things though too, because outside of that song, like now that you're not playing it, like I don't hear it that way. Like I hear it as very pivotal and very illustrative of where we were and are. I mean, it's interesting because Dave talks about that, about how he started making a list of what people were doing in '91, you know? And it's like, you know, there weren't tons of bands talking about, like there were the bands that we held up as our idols or as our tribe musically who were doing it. But, you know, certainly you weren't going to walk into a venue in Toronto and hear people singing about,
no.
you know, racial discrimination or feminism or, you know, what have you, like all the things, you know, the homeless problem, stuff like that. Like we were certainly picked up that ball early.
My partner Leanne tells me, "Oh yeah, this is off the record." things are
off
kind
the
of
records.
back on the table. But anyways, she considers that song as ahead of its time, and I forget the psychological term, but the idea that a ideological sort of bent that a parent can bring to a child can actually change them physically by subjecting them to that sort of racism, and it actually changes the development of the brain and things like that.
Right.
And there's you know, I'm not smart enough to remember the
There's a smarty
actual
pants
term.
word for it.
There's a smarty pants term. There's a clinical term for it, and
Right.
so she heard that song. She was like, "Wow, like you were singing about this," and I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I just anyway. So yeah, there you go.
Back on the record.
Back on the record.
There was two
Oh yeah, that whole thing can be on the record except for the part about
Who it was.
yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing about that is, you know, nowadays you might have a different position. If somebody comes up and talks to you like that nowadays, you might have a more sophisticated take than we would have had in '91 about, you know, you would instantly be internalizing that and going, what is it about me that this guy is
Yeah.
choosing to say this to me?
Yeah.
Whereas now, you know, just with everything that I think just the mainstream is getting more sophisticated with Black Lives Matter and
Yeah.
Systemic racism and stuff like that, just to realize how the environment works anyway. And I mean, to a sillier degree and a lesser degree, it's the same reason we would take on all of those frat boys that come. You know, the simple math is suddenly we're on the radio all the time. Way more people heard us, and way more people came to our shows, and we couldn't handpick who those people were.
Yeah.
So, you know, when it was in smaller venues and we didn't have anything on the radio, then it would only be the people who would fight to find the kind of music we made that would come, and then spread word of mouth.
Yeah,
But of course,
it's
when those frat boys came, we instantly internalized it all and said, "What are we doing?
Yeah.
What is wrong with us that these people are coming to see our shows?" Like, because the doors open and they're on the radio.
I mean, it's that plays itself out, you know, to this moment in time, and will probably continue to as long as there's human beings writing songs. But like, you know, you get guys like the current example is probably a guy like Jason Isbell, who is very, you know, very defined in what he believes politically, and you get sort of like a good old boy Southern bent of people that hear his music and go, "Oh my God, this is my stuff," and then they go to a show or they confront him on Twitter and he's talking about what his political beliefs are, and they're like, "Just shut up and play music. Like, you're not a politician. You just play music." And it's like, so we went through some of that with the Artists Against the War, and I'm sure that's sprinkled in.
Well, the Tommy Douglas Tuesdays,
Yeah.
you know, finally, what was it, like half a year in, and Trump, you know, was just being, I mean, the white nationalism and the, you know, the authoritarianism was just not even hidden anymore. And I had had enough.
Yeah.
Might have been after Charlottesville or something. And then that Tommy Tuesday, I just took that 30 seconds. I was like, we're just going to take a bit of a break. Anybody who's a Trump supporter now,
Yeah.
if you were a Trump supporter in 2016, whatever, maybe you didn't know, maybe, you know, if you're a Trump supporter now, please, you know, turn off your set. You're not, this is not a safe space for you. You're not welcome here. And you know, I'm sitting there just like, we're going to give them a minute, you know, okay, we're going on with the show. And then I took some crap from some friends in the States of mine who were like, yeah, I ran into a couple of people, they're really bummed about that. You know, it was like, I've been a fan for 30 years. I can't believe Ron did that. And I'm like, you know, and I just said, well, that's on them, because I said, for me, I can't understand how they could have been a fan for 30 years and been surprised by that conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm an open person, and I'll talk to, I have lots of friends who are Republicans down there who are sensible, fiscally conservative, and I don't agree with them on policy, but that's different than this, you know, and it's,
It's a phenomenon. I mean, just the idea that people, we talked about it earlier today, but that people they're glomming onto something that isn't the message for whatever reason. I mean, music, once it goes out in the world, is open to any interpretation. So, and it's to me, it's really amusing when it happens on the scale of a guy like Jason Isbell, or it happened to, I think the last time Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young toured together, and they, you know, obviously were a very politically minded band from day one, and they were like getting booed off the stage at their own shows because they were playing through the Deep South, and they would talk about, I think at that point it was Bush, and they would talk about what the Bush administration was doing to ruin the country, and people would walk out. It's like, well, so what is it? What did you miss? Like that's
you're
really,
surprised.
Yeah,
they were surprised and offended enough to leave.
Yeah, it's really strange. And you know, I mean, and even, you know, I mean, the music, the message that comes through there is pretty, like it's not like beating you over the head with a hammer. Maybe like a song like "Helpless" or something like, not "Helpless," sorry, Ohio. Is that the name of that song? Ohio? "Four Dead in Ohio."
You're asking me?
Yeah, no, this is not your wheelhouse. Anyways, next song.
Okay, I gotta change the hard. Okie dokie, smokies. It's St. Brendan's Way.
St. Brendan's Way. There you go. That's another, St. Brendan's Way is a good example of, you know, being young and a sponge and curious about everything. And I would be fascinated to have a time machine when I brought that into the band and to go, it's a song about a monk who got in a leather canoe and sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, isn't that awesome? You know, it's like I had been reading a lot about, because my mom probably had brought up people like family of ours in Ireland, like on my maternal grandfather's side, they're all from Belfast. So I think she might have brought that up and started a bit of a renaissance with me about reading about Ireland. And I was reading a book called Paddy's Lament, and then I don't even know if it was in that book, but I came across this idea of St. Brendan who got in a leather canoe long before Greta Thunberg did it. He was an early adopter, got in this supposedly leather canoe, and I don't know, from what I remember, it would probably be about the size of this couch to here, and sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to Newfoundland. And I just thought, well, that's a real story of, I don't even know what it's a metaphor for, but it's a real story of triumph. And we started to work on that one. And that one we really leaned into, and I don't think we ever did after that, really leaned into that sort of pogsy, weddings, parties, anything, Irish folk music, Australian folk music kind of vibe. And we really went with it. And even then asked our guests like Rachel to come in and play Boron and Doug to play accordion at the end for that little reprise. That was a nice
Jonathan
little...
Bortson played
and Johnny
mandolin,
Bortson.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I remember about that one, is that it's a sort of a weird anomaly in the middle of the record. You know, some very, very local songs about very local happenings, and then this one outlier that's about a historical event.
It's funny as we go through these and not having any particular, definitive memories of actually recording the song, or the parts of the song or whatever. Like I do, as each song kind of falls, I sort of think, this one was also a big play in the live show. Like people, but I think maybe it was just the whole collection. Like there wasn't many songs people didn't want to hear from that record. So
yeah, one thing I do feel about that one specifically, St. Brendan, is that bridge is just exultant. It's like we do this thing, and then that bridge comes, and I know for me it completely pushes the absolute top threshold of notes I can hit. And the harmonies in it just become this. It just opens up into this exultant, majestic thing. It's one of my favorite moments on the record, I think, is that bridge.
Andy Craddock, there's a letter from Bilbao. Is it Bilbao?
It is.
But Andy says that because you said it wrong.
Yeah, I did.
Bilbao.
Because I was young and dumb and full of mispronunciations. Letter from Bilbao. Hilariously, I've said this since, which is that, so letter from Bilbao for the Hand of Magdalena, and then the song Girona Train that we were playing in Popular Front were kind of meant to be a trilogy. And I remember we were talking about it, and I think, as I remember, and I could be remembering it wrong, we didn't do Girona Train because it had been written maybe a year earlier. And we were so adamant, this was such a new blood transfusion with the new band, and we're so adamant to be in the now that it was like, that's fucking a year old. We can't put that song on the record. That's blow the dust off it. And so of course, wait 30 years and then we put it on a record.
But interesting, because I think Girona Train, as we recorded it in Popular Front, was probably the beginning of Lowest to the Low as far as arrangement goes. Like it would have fit. And as I haven't heard that recording in many, many years, but what I do remember about it is that it maybe just was marked with the production of that time, which was probably 86, 87, and had we have re-recorded it it would have fit on Shakespeare really well, is what I'm saying. Like it would have.
Well, except for one thing, which is that it suffers from the version that exists from Popular Front, suffers from I'm gonna adjust this joke and say, at that time we would have said, let's run down this hill and record that song. And then later we would say, let's walk down this hill and record all of those songs. Because it is so fast, and it lacks a certain kind of soulfulness maybe that would come later,
It's funny, you're right. That song exists in my head at a lower speed. It just like that part that I was playing, which was kind of like mimicking the vocal line, just kind of like following the vocal line behind the vocal line, just exists at a lower speed. But anyways,
if that's your memoir, that's the title of your memoir. That song exists in my head at a lower speed. But the other thing about that too is that being a trilogy about the Spanish Civil War was that I know growing up, like becoming a young teenager and becoming a Marxist, and then all through the 80s, going farther down that rabbit hole of the history of Marxism, and you come across the Spanish Civil War, which again, as a songwriter, it's got everything. It's like got this built-in sense of bravery and cowardice and betrayal and adventure, and and the stakes were so high, and it could be said that had the Spanish Civil War gone a different way, had maybe the West not abandoned a democratically elected socialist government and backed them up, and they had won that war, you could arguably say that maybe World War II might not have happened because Hitler and Mussolini got emboldened by what they did in Spain and were testing a bunch of weapons, and that led to, certainly didn't curtail World War II. So that's one tragedy about it, which I think has all this, gravitas and romance built into it. And then I was also talking to a younger band recently about how hard it has gotten to be a band in this world and in this society, and how you keep it together, how you do shows, how like we were just talking about how immigration may have just gone up 300%.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the bands that we know, younger bands, it's just like, well, that's us out. We can't possibly go do gigs there. And I said, it's funny because it comes down to things like this. As I say, Dave says the other day, we've only got enough money in the bank for one more photo shoot. And then I get contacted by the Spanish Civil War Museum. So there's a virtual museum in English and Spanish, and they've asked if they could use Letter from Bilbao.
Oh, cool.
And I wrote a piece for it, and there's an audio thing that I recorded for it. So the only two other bands that are in there are Manic Street Preachers and The Clash. Oh, so wow. It's The Clash, Manic Street Preachers, and Lowest of the Low.
That's amazing. On
this amazing virtual site. And it's a very comprehensive site about the history of the Spanish Civil War. So I said, here's where we're at, is that probably once or twice a week, I get an opportunity of something like that. Somebody contacts me with something like that, which is an amazing blessing and an amazing honor. But of course, none of them are paid gigs, So it's like, you have the kind of career that we have, and you get to a place where the respect is very large, but the monetization of it is not. So you're in a situation where it's like, that's amazing, and I feel blessed to be here and to get that opportunity.
It's funny because I think I maybe should still be in the band yet, because I've decided that I'm an expert at finding work that doesn't pay. I think that's my niche in life, is finding work that doesn't pay.
Right.
Like I could do that I could be working 90 hours a week.
If you had a nickel for every time you found a piece of work that didn't pay,
I wouldn't have that nickel.
You wouldn't have a nickel.
Under the Carlisle Bridge, we got that. Saving Carolyn, Gossip Talk, Blues, and Hitters. So we're coming down the last floor.
Where are we at?
We're at 105.
No, song?
Oh, sorry, Under the Carlisle Bridge.
Oh, Under the Carlisle Bridge. Yeah, we kind of covered it a little bit with it being a bit of a diptych with kind of the lonely one. Sort of about the idea of struggle, the idea of what you're going to do with your band. And as I say in that one, I'm referencing Ken and I walking under the Carlisle Bridge in the snow, talking about, probably if we had recorded those conversations and played them for you, they would be, there would be a great deal of embarrassing naivete in them. But at the same time, it's the jet fuel. I think it's the jet fuel that gets you to that place, to think you're going to actually change the world with your music. Whether you believe that when you say it or not, there's something about saying it, and there's something about it meaning something to you, that your music not just be a way to get girls and get your face on the internet or whatever, and just and then I guess for people like us, I think there's also a built-in booby trap to that, which is that I don't know about you, but I have had definitely many times in my adult life where I've sort of just taken a breath and thought to myself, so you're like a folk singer? Is that what you do? And how valuable is that? And of course I'm not naive, so I get, as I'm sure you do, get stopped by people all the time. Most recently, a guy contacted me online and said, hey Ron, what are your 4 top Lowest of the Low songs? And I was like, oh, and I thought he was just asking me. And I said, well, that's a hard one, because I have a fondness for a whole bunch of them. So I narrowed it down to 4 songs, sent him the 4 songs, and then his response to that, he says, I'm going in for chemo on the weekend, and he said, this is all I'm going to listen to. So, those moments when I'm going, am I just a folk singer? It's like, it comes down to like, well, no, that's a valuable thing in the world. But it runs up against my, the political beast in me that says, yeah, but I'm just entertaining and singing for people. It's like, that's one-on-one, and is that enough? Or do I need to be doing something much more abstract in life? And do I need to be fighting the Spanish Civil War? Do I need to be going out and changing the political landscape as we know it? And of course, people probably shouldn't do that to themselves, but I do that to myself.
Yeah, I mean,
is this worth? Should I be on the street doing work? Should I be on the stage doing work? Maybe the answer is both. I mean, we have, we're working with Chris Brown, and Chris has that incredible pros and cons.
Yeah.
You know, so there's ways to do both. And our friend John Sampson works. Well, maybe I shouldn't be saying this. Maybe this is off the record, but works in prisons with people on a one-to-one basis. Obviously, that's valuable work. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just that's such a nice take on it all, and I think that's all in the context to me of life moving at the speed of sound, and just, you know, you maybe you don't have enough time to sort of stop and take stock. You do every once in a while, but it's not like, you know, there's like a snowball that's just rolling. That's what it is you do. And like people like, yeah, you're right about people like Chris that find the time to build something monumental into, and it you know, it starts off as an ideology, and he actually takes it and makes it into something. Like Chris is amazing because he's got so many irons and so many fires, and somehow keeps them all burning. It's quite amazing. Just to sort of change the topic on this song for a second, the one thing that does strike me about Under the Carlisle Bridge was it was probably the first time we ever had like I don't know what it is. It was 32 bars or 64 bars of solo in that song, and it was like I remember thinking,
Here you
"How are
go.
we gonna fill all this? Like this is crazy. I'm not a lead guitarist," and that was fun because we take it through like 3 or 4 different movements when it gets to the syncopated part, and yeah, I always like that. That's one of my favorite things on the record, guitar-wise, is that little kind of riff that takes it from the verse into the chorus. I really like that part. So, for what it's worth.
There you go, Clapton.
Taming of Carolyn.
Yeah, Taming of Carolyn is another holdover from Popular Front. Which is funny because that makes me wonder why Bloodline and Taming of Carolyn got held over to Shakespeare, but Joanna Train did not.
Yeah.
And
But I think it's probably, and I may be wrong about this, but I think we were playing Girona Train live. I'm not sure that we played those two live with Popular Front.
So they felt newer,
yeah,
or
they felt newer, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and that one was just a take on my personal life, the situation in the home of my partner at the time, and how I saw it. You know, this sense of like, in some ways big attempts by the family to kind of shut her down, but then 1,000 little ways every day in which they would shut her down or narrow her options. You know, and then I thought, and it's ironic that we call the album Shakespeare in My Butt, and then there's a reference to Shakespeare in that title, Taming of Carolyn. But you know,
I don't know if we even considered that at the time.
Irony is what
cool.
my name is right in it. I put the Ron in irony.
Gossip Talking Blues. We got 2 more to do. We got about 20 minutes for Ron.
Gossip Talking Blues.
Yeah.
So somebody said to Steve, "Hey, play the solo at light speed."
Yeah.
You must have loved that. And also I must say that when we play that, it's fast enough on the record, and then knowing how we were live, which is that
Everything
take
was
whatever's on the
faster.
record and multiply it by 3.
Yeah.
You must have, I can't remember, but there must have been nights where your fingers were literally on fire, or
It's funny because I think when we've gone back to it, that I've noticed the speed. I don't think I did back then. I think it was always. I'm not saying it was always precise live, but it wasn't ever sort of feeling like I needed to catch up on it. It really worked back then, and it was because that song had so many movements in it, and it had dynamics that sort of went way up and then dropped way down, where it's just vocals. It was like just a stellar moment live every time, and I'm sure it still is. Like it just had that sort of. It was tailor made for being a live song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's funny thematically too. It shines a little light on where I was, or where I think we were as a little community, which is that we were a little tiny community of people that nobody probably knew about or cared about. But I wrote something like Gossip Talking Blues because there was this sense that all eyes were on us.
Yeah.
You know, and the talk was going around, and the loose lips sink ships kind of thing. And
So
but
it was
again,
a
it's
precursor then.
a precursor.
It was a harbinger of what was to come.
But it's one of those things, like I'm saying about, you know, beating your chest and talking about changing the world, is I think, as silly as it might look at its face, or as silly as it might look to think that all eyes are on us at this moment when they're not, it puts you in the right headspace to look at your life. As I talk about those days, like looking at my life like I was the protagonist in a film about my own life, you know, or that we were the protagonists, the gang in the film of our own life, because that's a weird, I'm sure that you can still palpably feel it, right? That was a weird period of time where the atmosphere was just electric. Like it really was just, everything was just, there was pixie dust on everything, because by no real engineering of our own, we just found ourselves in a place at the right time, and then we made the best of it.
And like every time the phone rang during those years, it was some new opportunity, some new offer for the band to do something that we hadn't done before. And it was such an exciting time. There was just so many different things that happen on a daily basis that once, like it's all momentum, right? Once the momentum's going, and then like 95, it was like, it came to a screeching halt and just everything just stopped. So,
and also the curiosity, like of being that age and being that curious. And it's always something as a life philosophy I've tried to keep going, is I think the only thing that keeps you alive as you get older, and especially as an artist, but even as a human, is just to try to maintain that curiosity about life, because then, as you say, everything looks like an open door, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas the minute you lose that, everything looks like a closed door.
Yeah.
And you just feel hemmed in more and more and more, and your life just becomes, you know, sort of a hermetically sealed thing, you know? But it was so palpable, and you didn't really have to work at it in those days, because it was like magic, you know?
Cool.
That was awesome. We don't need. I mean, Henry needs a new pair of shoes, but that was a good closing kind of thing you just did there.
Yeah, but we should probably talk about Henry just in terms of, like, again, another one not unlike Eternal Fatalist that's a total barn burner live, and a 2-guitar dance. And, you know, and again, as Dave had said, like with that thing about, there was a local guy in my neighborhood at the time who may or may not have been named Henry, but who was experiencing homelessness and had, I think the time I saw him, well, that's the worst, I saw him a lot, but in the winter when I saw his shoes were held together with electrical tape, and it was all frayed, and you could see toes and stuff like that, and just imagining what winter was going to be for this guy. And again, he was one of the protagonists in the neighborhood, so he became part of the songs.
I think because it's the last song on the record, I think it might be cool to sort of point out that the album sequence was completely written like a set list. And I don't think a lot of people were doing that in those days. Like we really sort of wrote it so it had the bang off the top, kind of maybe settled in for a bit in the middle, and then just moved towards like this massive crescendo at the end with Gossip, and then Henry ending the show. And like Henry was a great show ender.
Yeah.
And not to say we did every show in that order, but we just wrote the sequence of the album, you know, as a set list and not so much as a album sequence. It was meant to feel like a show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. I think we're good.
Cut.
Where's the after party?
I'll hit stop on the.